Hi, it's Rod Disler again. This channel is the Internal Guide to TA. Today's video is really going to be about how you've been invited to an interview. Congratulations. What do you need to do to prepare? That's what I'm going to cover in the first part. Then I'm going to cover in the second part how an interview process should work and what it should look like. So you shouldn't have any surprises. And the final part is really talking about red flags during an interview process itself. So you've been applying, and you got an interview. Fantastic. You have 5 minutes of this wonderful utopian feeling. Then reality sets in. You've got to start preparing for an interview. So I'm going to start out with the real basics, because the amount of times I've seen candidates really screw up the real basics is huge. So key thing, select a time which is convenient to yourself. Be in a quiet spot. Do it at a desk or a table, off a laptop or tablet. Now, if you have to do it off the phone, let the recruiter know why you have to do it off the phone. You might be at work, you don't have access, you can't do it off a corporate laptop, and you only have a phone. Perfectly acceptable, but give a real reason, okay? And really another key thing is testing the input and output settings on your webcam, microphone, and speakers. The amount of times interviews have been delayed and we've lost time, or interviews have had to be rearranged because we all use different platforms, from Zoom to Teams to Google Hangouts. It screws around with your input and output settings. So do a test with the recruiter beforehand, or colleague who you trust, or family member or friend. Make sure you do that test. So that's all sorted on that side. In terms of research, what you should be doing, okay, obviously you look at the company website, look at the company values. That's absolutely critical. Look at the leadership team. Yet again, if you can remember a few names of the leadership team, particularly the CEO or any female leaders on the executive team, fantastic. Whether or not they've got any investors, really, really clean. Look at LinkedIn, see how many people they have, where they work, how many countries they operate in, okay? Other key aspects which to look at is look at things on Google like TechCrunch, get an idea of the competition, or, revenue numbers, the amount of investment which they got. Normally, you won't get asked any of these questions in and around that. They'll tell you all of this information, but I've been there as a candidate and as an interviewer and say, what do you know about Rod Disler Limited? What do you know about who the boss, who the CEO is? How many women do we have on our leadership team? So yet again, having that information written down on a notepad next to you is really critical. Another two very underutilized resources, in my opinion, are YouTube and Glassdoor. Okay, so go onto YouTube, see if the company in question has a YouTube channel. You don't have to watch the half an hour long videos or hour long videos going through tech in detail, unless you're techie and that kind of thing rocks your world. But they might have something around company culture. They might have something around values. They'll have quick overviews of their solutions and services. So yet again, it's a very easy way for you to pick up information about the company, about the culture, about the values, and about what they're offering. Glassdoor itself. Candidates go on there, but this is what you should be looking for on Glassdoor. Common themes about the company, pros and cons. Okay? That enables you to ask difficult questions to the hiring manager or hiring VP. So I understand there's a really great work-life balance. You take, mental wellness of your employees really seriously. Can you tell me a lot more about what you do to support that? But I see there's a lot of common themes in around chops and changes in senior management, within strategic direction of the company. So yet again, it's your opportunity to pick up information, find out information, and really be able to question people in the interview process in and around that. Okay, you've got to remember an interview should be a two-way information of exchange. It's not just them about interviewing you. Okay, so that's how I would conduct my research. In terms of other preparations, very simple things. Having a pen and notepad next to you. The reason why I say it's very simple, but it's actually seen as really professional, is it shows you're listening, and it goes down to the art of listening. Other kind of key critical things are that, if you have a lot of distractions at home, young ones, make sure they're on a games console, you've given them a phone, they're in a separate room, you're sitting at a desk, looking smartly dressed. You don't have to be suited and booted, but just wearing a nice shirt or a nice blouse. You're not sitting there in a t-shirt. You're not sitting there on the sofa with curlers on, and I've had candidates do that. It's really makes, people will pick up on this, that you're actually taking it seriously and you're being professional. Okay? So yet again, I would recommend, you're in that quiet space. Now, in regards to the interview process itself, so typically it's 4 to 5 stages, can be shorter, can be longer, depending on the seniority of the role. But typically you'll get invited to do a half an hour telephone interview or Zoom interview with the recruiter. Recruiters are measured on many different things. Typically, one of the things their measurements is doing half an hour calls. Okay? That doesn't often mean, depending on how the recruiter runs that interview, doesn't often mean you'll get to ask the questions which you want to ask. Don't be afraid to send up a follow-up email to get more information about the role, okay, or if you have any particular questions which you want to ask. Now, one of the key aspects which you need to make sure you're doing before you head into any interview process is making sure that you just don't have the job ad, but you ask the recruiter for a job description. Job ads are different from job descriptions, okay, and I can bore you to death why they are. Now, you get through the recruiter, hiring manager likes your CV and wants you to interview. Now, that's typically about 45 minutes to an hour. This is where the first red flag might appear. If the hiring manager wants you to do an assessment, particularly if you're a technical individual or a finance person, where I see this regularly, that's an immediate red flag. And it tells me that the hiring manager is not vested in candidates, not vested in talent acquisition, and is not invested in their team. You might want to say, depending on your situation, thank you, but no thank you. Okay. Now, say your interview with the hiring manager goes really well. There's usually the next step will either be interviewing with the hiring manager's manager, so a VP or director, a team or panel interview or presentation. Then, typically this is, either before that panel or presentation or technical interview, there might be a technical interview, a technical assessment or an assessment before you do that. So don't be surprised if an assessment comes in after your interview with the hiring manager, depending on what type of role you're going for and whether or not the company implements that process. So you get through the panel interview, technical assessment, presentation. Usually the final call will either be with someone at the C-level or VP or with the recruiter or the hiring manager. And then, congratulations, fingers crossed, you will hopefully be made an offer. That's typically how a recruitment process works internally. And that's what you should be expecting as a candidate. Now, red flags. This is my favorite subject. I've seen lots and lots of horror stories from people I know, people I've hired, XYZ. Red flags to watch out for. I've already mentioned this briefly earlier, that if you're asked to do an assessment before you've even spoken to a recruiter, reality is I would generally recommend today saying no. Yet again, depending on your personal circumstances. And I'll give you 2 very good examples. A few years ago, I was selected to, for the process at Klarna. I got sent an assessment. It was an hour long. I did it. It was an assessment built for software engineers, not recruiters. I did the assessment, never heard back. I've got a former colleague, who recently did an assessment. First part of the assessment was 45 minutes. Second part was an hour. He never heard back. So yet again, if they're immediately asking you to do an assessment, probably it's a no. Okay? Because there's no wrong or right answers in those assessments. Quite simple. So yet again, I would say thank you, but no thank you. I'm not going to do an assessment if no one's going to speak to me. Your time is valuable. Other red flags to look for. One of the red flags which I would notice, look at the person's eye contact with you. Are they looking at you? Do they seem distracted? If they are, they're not really interested in you. They're going through a process. And I would just say, this stage, to say, look, you're really interested in me. I can tell that by the way you're acting over the video call. Do you want to rearrange when it's more convenient for you, or should we just call it a day here and there? Yet again, your time is valuable, your energy is valuable. If these people aren't taking interviews seriously and are not prepared for it, you're wasting your time, and I can guarantee you 99.9999% you will be a no. Because they're not going to remember you, they're not going to remember that interview. Okay, it's brutal, it's harsh, but that's reality. Don't be afraid to say, would it be a more convenient time to look at you, to rearrange this interview when you're not so distracted and you're prepared to look at me? And I can give some great examples here. I won't do, because some of them are quite personal, but that's another red flag to look out for. Another red flag to look out for is, do they seem very robotic in their interview? They're just going to ask the questions. And I'm going to put a link to a guy called Careervidz, his YouTube channel. And he gives wonderful ability on the types of questions that you will be asked in an interview. And literally, I can tell you right now, there's so many interviewers out there who will go to Google and say, what type of interview questions can I ask? This guy nails it down and tells you how to answer it. Now, it depends on the level of hiring, the type of hiring. These are questions which salespeople are not going to be asked, nor marketing or finance people, generally, depending on the seniority, or technical folks will be asked. But yet again, it gives a very good overview of some of the questions which you'll get asked. Like, tell me, what are your weaknesses? And he'll give you an answer how to answer that question. It's fantastic. And he's got 3.6 million subscribers plus. So yet again, this is someone who's been a hiring manager, someone who's been able to interview there. So yet again, depending on your seniority, depending on what type of role you do, he's worth definitely watching. It's really good for him because he can tell you, and it makes me laugh. But I know people who will tell me, I've watched his videos and I've gone in for an interview and literally he's given me the answers to all those questions because they've literally just gone to Google. Now, the reason why I call this a red flag is that means the company's not investing in training or developing their people to actually look at a CV, to actually ability to assess that CV, and ability to judge your experience and your skills to actually do the job and be there. What they're hiring on, do I like you? Are you a good fit for me and my team? Can I get on with you and go and have lunch with you every day? That's what they're generally. Yet again, they're not assessing your skills and experience. They're assessing you as whether or not they like you. Okay? Anyway, so those are some of the red flags which you should spot out for. So yet again, just quickly recap. Make sure that you're in a quiet spot. You're doing it off a desk and a table. You're trying to do it off a laptop or tablet. Have a reason if you have to do it off the phone. Tell the recruiter it's not a problem. Make sure you're smartly dressed. It doesn't have to be suited and booted. Make sure you are having a pen and notepad. You have your CV next to you. You have a copy of job description next to you. Those kind of simple things. And then watch out for those red flags. Okay? In terms of the feedback you'll get from each stage, normally you should be hearing feedback within 48 hours to 72 hours. If you haven't heard feedback in that period, I'm going to be very brutal with you. Unless they told you we're going to be interviewing loads of other candidates over the next week, so we'll get back to you next week. The reality is you probably know. We are an employer-driven market at this present time. Therefore, employers are taking their time. They think there's abundance of candidates out there which they can get to pick and choose from. That's their mentality. Unfortunately, as candidates, we have to kind of suck it up. It's a bad candidate experience. It's not how you should do hiring. But the reality is that's where a lot of people are at the moment. They might be chopping and changing roles. We're going to retask that role, XYZ. A lot of internal recruiters, teams are being cut to the bare bone. They're demoralised. But reality is if a manager likes you, you should hear back within 48 to 72 hours. Unless they've set their expectations up front saying, I'm on holiday for the next week, but let's sync up the next week afterwards. I've got 4 more candidates to interview. That's good practice. Anyway, I'll say au revoir, ciao, Sweet Swain, sayonara, annyeong, take care.